Who's friends with all the night dreamers talking to you at night? Gary on the radio, but maybe he's not in sight. Bigfoot's on his tail, flying UFOs, that's right. Gary's talk show radio, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday nights. If you need a friend to talk to, he will always be there. The Night Dreamers talk show will fix your despair. If you want to talk conspiracies, Night Dreamers is for you. Top secret case, alien space, it's Gary with the news. Tune in on the radio, don't let Big Brother know. They're listening to everything, even Gary's late night show. If you need a friend to talk to, he will always be there. The Night Show Dreamers talk show will fix your despair, because Gary's talking to you at night.
The views and opinions expressed by guests on Night Dreams with Gary Anderson do not necessarily reflect those of the Night Dreams Talk Radio Network, its hosts, staff, or sponsors. This show is for entertainment purposes only. Listener discretion is advised. From deep within the broadcast bunker, a voice cuts through the static and smashes the silence. This is the show that rips the lid off reality, exposes the shadows, and dares to ask the questions no one else will. Get ready for truth at full throttle with the man himself, Gary Anderson.
And another Thursday. I'll tell you what, JC, today has been a really hectic day, by the way.
Yeah, I think I can't argue with that one. But you know what? We're here, and it's a green light, so it's going to be a good show. Oh, yeah. You know what has been going and circulating around now? And I got some from really secure resources. You know, Tic Tac might not been, well, E.T., what we've been all being fed by all these other podcasts, documentaries. Yeah, and if you go back, and I said about, year and a half, 2 years ago, I said, I think it's human-made. I actually said on the air, I thought it was human-made, but from reverse engineered, obviously. But yeah, I think it's human-made. Yeah, by a company out of California that makes all these military aircraft. Yeah, and think about this. There's another, couple dozen of these subcontractors out there, so Lord knows what they got going on. Yeah, well, you know, again, we're getting feedback there, JC. You got something turned up loud?
You know, what is interesting is it's so much fighting going on in ufology right now. And everybody's making these claims and all this stuff like that spear thing and all that stuff. And it's gotten really out of control.
Yeah, it's a he said, she said, and my idea is right and you're wrong. And it's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's totally crazy. I mean, but, it is what it is. But, I really think, disclosure is going to happen one day when a UFO crashes in a populated area.
Well, you would think so. But allegedly that's happened sometimes. And then they cover up and, replace whole pavements and yards and everything. And nothing to see here.
Well, back in the late 50s, the SR71, I wonder how many people, when they saw that fly, oh, my God. It's a UFO.
That's right. I'm going to tell you something. First time I seen a stealth fighter back in the late 80s. I was on a rooftop about 200 feet in the air on an old defunct steel mill. When it went over, it was soundless. And when it went over, about blew me off. And if nobody didn't think any better, you would have thought it was some kind of UFO. But once again, man-made object.
Yeah. Well, let's find out about our guest here tonight. Let's do that.
Yeah.
Ted Huetter is a pilot, writer, and photographer based in Seattle, covering aviation and spaceflight subjects since 1980. His work has been seen and read in publications ranging from Air Classics to Air and Space Smithsonian, while other subjects were featured in Newsweek and Variety. From 1995 to 2005, Huetter was a writer and communicator at NASA's Dryden, now Armstrong, Flight Research Center at Edwards Air Force Base, producing video, print, and web media supporting the agency's aeronautics, education, public affairs, and history programs. Since 2008, he's been the public relations manager at the renowned Museum of Flight in Seattle, both representing the museum and speaking about aviation and space topics with media from around the world. He's the co-author of Edwards Air Force Base, a photo history of the legendary home of the right stuff. Huetter has been a pilot for over 40 years with glider and airplane ratings. He especially loves flying aerobatics and currently flies a Christian Eagle aerobatic biplane.
A biplane? Wow, Ted. What are the wings covered with? Okay, I'm not hearing you. Let's see. Okay, there we go.
There we go.
Yeah.
How are you doing?
Oh, fine. What are the wings covered on with your biplane?
Fabric. Yeah.
Wow.
Plenty strong.
Yeah, but I've seen how some of those planes were built back, during World War I and all that. I mean, have you ever had any problems with the plane, like wanting to come apart?
No, not. I've had pieces fall off in planes before. Like I've had tail wheels fall off of the airplane. Not this plane. Yeah, this goes back to when I worked at a glider port, and most of the time I was towing gliders. So I'm flying this little plane, former crop dusting airplane. It's like a flying truck. It's made to be flown all day long and take lots of abuse. Fun plane to fly. So it would go through thousands and thousands of takeoffs and landings a day. So it took a lot of abuse. But there were a few times where the tail wheel came off. So I did an old-fashioned tail skid landing, just like they did back in the day. So no big incident there. I've been pretty lucky. I've had a few things go wrong from time to time, but you just deal with them.
Back 40 years ago, that point, I think I was married 7 years to Linda. I was gliding since I was in high school. And, of course, I stopped for a while, and then I picked it up for a while. But I used to glide out of Enumclaw. There's a nice little mountain top there, and it was really nice, except when you come in, there's these big, rocks on each side, and you have to slip it, kind of like a 45-degree angle to clear it.
Yeah. Things like that, they're intimidating, on takeoff and landing, only because they're there. But, basically you're doing the same type of thing. You're just taking off and landing on that runway, right in front of you. And you wouldn't normally be afraid of that runway, but when you see trees on the side or, power lines at the end, that sort of thing, it changes the mental picture more than anything else.
The airport down in Issaquah, I'm sure you're familiar with that.
The former airport.
My former, that tells you, I haven't, that was in high school when I was in the Civil Air Patrol. I was out with the glider and I was trying to show off. And I stayed out too long. And I figured, okay, I'm going to make it back. And there used to be a Kentucky Fried Chicken, restaurant there. When they had the steeples. Well, I took their steeple off.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And then
How far away was that from the airport? How close were you?
A quarter of a mile.
Oh.
But I thought I was going to clear it to swing in, and evidently I didn't clear it. So, they kicked me out of the Civil Air Patrol. And yeah. But anyway, so you've been flying a lot.
They normally go and fly and look for people like you that have to land off field.
Oh, I never, that scared me. Just like that place, my friend he was really into gliding. He got me back into it for, about 8 months, and I quit. I wish I would have went powercraft, but at the time I didn't have the funds. We had a bunch of kids, and that's how it was. Now, what is the most fun, scary experience you had flying so far?
Oh, geez. You mentioned in the intro, I like acro. So, like aerobatics are just a thrill because you're using all three dimensions in front of you and around you.
But so wait a minute, Ted, if you're in a biplane, do you have any glass cockpit over your head? Or you just...
Oh, yeah. There's a plexiglass. So it's not like a completely open cockpit in this plane. But a lot of those planes do, the older ones. So you're not out in the wind.
No, but
you got this fantastic view as if you were. So that's, just always a pleasure, always a thrill. But I'd say as far as the more sporty experiences, as my Air Force buddies used to call things like that. Most of those probably go back to the days that I was working at the glider port, because it was very intense at times. There's a lot of, the idea is that, you want to deliver these gliders in thermals and air that's going up. And, typically, it may not be happening in very many places near the airport. So if you've got several tow planes taking up gliders one after another, pretty soon this one area of lifting air gets pretty busy with other aircraft. So it's an environment that really doesn't exist in other kinds of flying. You're flying around other airplanes that are spinning around, and they're concentrating on working that lift, and you're slowly approaching that so you can get as close as you can so the glider can get off and join in the fun. So it can be pretty intense, and your situational awareness has to be very very acute, because you're putting yourself into kind of a midair collision sort of scenario. So it was exciting, but it really kept you on your toes in ways that most ordinary flying doesn't even encounter. Because if you're flying normal patterns at most airports, everything's very controlled. You're under tower control, and they're going to make sure that everyone's spaced out safely and that sort of thing. So it's a different world, but it was fun.
Yeah, it sounds like, I only had my wife one time go up with me, and we rented the gliders there, and I got stuck with an old aluminum Norwegian trainer, a 4-seater. So, when you get
Four-seater.
four-seater, two up front, two in the back, and your time, if you were lucky, on a good day, you can maybe stay up about 20 minutes. But I remember the tow plane took us up, and I hit the release. And I tell you, with that, that sudden drop, when you hit the release, my wife was screaming, "You killed me!" And I said, "We're not going to crash. Not yet."
Yeah.
No Kentucky
Did
Fried
she know
Chicken
about
places.
the Golden Arches episode then, or the KFC arches?
KFC, yeah. Yeah, she did. She heard that story. And
She's brave.
she was
brave
brave
person.
No Kentucky Fried Chicken in that area, so she was safe. Now, when it comes to the museum, you got some beautiful aircraft in there.
Oh yeah.
And
Yeah, it's quite a treat. I mean, I've been around for years now, and I still don't get tired of looking at them.
Well, how did you get the SR71 there?
Well, I'll have to get all nerdy on you for a moment because it's really not an SR71.
Uh-oh, I'm sorry.
Just kind of looks like one. It's actually called an MD-21. And it dates back to a CIA program. And the idea was that these Blackbirds, so it looks, it's the same looking plane as it's in the Blackbird family. So it looks like an SR-71. But it was actually before that. It was an A-12. So it was modified A-12. And they put this pylon on the top of it. And that would mount a drone. So the idea was that instead of, the actually flying over Russia or wherever you wanted to spy, you would just sort of be off the coast or, across the border and launch this drone. And, this is all going at, Mach 3 speeds too. So this drone would fire off and it would go inside on a program course, take its pictures, come back, and then drop this camera package via parachute. They would be picked up in midair by a C-130. Real James Bond kind of stuff, 1960s. But it was a little too much. They were doing about the fourth test flight off the coast of California, and the drone, it misfired and hit the tail of the Blackbird. So the Blackbird now is breaking up, and the crew of two had to eject, so over the water, and one of the crew members drowned. And that's when they just said, okay, this is crazy. This is enough of this. So they only made two of these airplanes, and ours is the survivor of that program. So it's really something special. It looks like a SR-71, but no, it's a little different.
When was it
built? And it has a drone.
When was it built?
I believe at the top of my head, talking about 1967 or so, 67, 68.
Now, the Blackbirds originally come out, in the late 50s?
No, the whole program started in the early 60s. So I think the prototype flew in about 62-ish. But, it was secret for a little while until it was revealed to President Johnson, and he went public with it, and that was that. But, as far as their missions go, many, many, many secret missions. And what's fascinating now is that so many stories are just coming out, these stories that have been secret for so many years, for decades. And, maybe not as many of the pilots are still around anymore to tell them, but, you have others, either researchers or, in some cases, maybe family members that are talking about the stories that Dad used to, share later on. But information is coming out, and it just gets more amazing as time goes on.
Well, what was interesting about that plane, a couple of times they had, missiles flying at them, and the craft was like faster than the missiles at the time.
Yeah, they performed as designed. I mean, the whole idea is that you were flying something that was faster and could fly higher than virtually anything else. So it had no defensive weapons on it, except its speed and altitude, and it worked. They never got shot down. There are lots of stories about Soviet pilots trying these fantastic zooms, trying to catch them, and they'd watch these things, they get closer, 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 and then all of a sudden, well, they just can't fly high enough, and they're back down again.
Interesting too. Now they use fuel like you wouldn't believe. That's one thing. Second, too, I read that the way that they were made, the fuel tank, and that they leaked a lot of fuel.
Well, only on the ground. And it wasn't a lot, it's all true, but, the way that it was made is that, as the aircraft would heat up at speeds, the nose is about 500 degrees Fahrenheit, and a lot of the aircraft is still hundreds of degrees Fahrenheit. So it would stretch in flight, probably 8 or 9 inches. And to accommodate that, it's actually kind of loosely constructed. So like it's a flying fuel tank. I mean, the wings and the belly, there's fuel tanks everywhere. And, so when it's cool, when it's at normal temperatures on the ground, there's places for the fuel to leak. And it was more along the lines of drips, really. They had drip pans all over the place underneath the airplane. And, but I was lucky enough, when I was working at NASA Dryden, they were flying the last 2 Blackbirds. So those were in the hangar. You go in there and there'd be about a dozen drip pans under these planes. But, it's really just hardly a puddle beneath each one. But, as soon as they're up and flying and got their speed, everything is sealed up tight.
Very interesting. Now, when you first walk in the museum, you see this MiG. Can you tell the listeners about that?
Well, which one? Are you talking about our new MiG-21
the new
that's
one
beaded?
Yeah, it glows.
Oh, yeah. Okay, this is fantastic. It's an art project, so really I think you really have to look at it in terms of it used to be a MiG-21 and now it's a sculpture. But it was a decommissioned Polish MiG that flew in the 1980s. It knocked around for a while until finally showed up in a sort of a resale yard in Florida in the 90s. And by the early 2000s, this LA-based artist named Ralph Zeman, originally from South Africa, bought it and shipped it back to his studio in LA. And it was the third part of a trilogy, of an artwork trilogy that he'd started about a dozen years ago now. And the idea is that they wanted to take weapons of mass production and turn them into works of art. And he grew up in South Africa, apartheid South Africa. He saw the unfairness of that and the suffering of that, and really was looking at the weapons involved in that. So the project started out with AK-47s, which is probably the most mass-produced weapon ever. And they would take traditional African beadwork. So that's usually, the traditional stuff that you would see by the side of the road there would be like little animals and, tchotchkes and things like that were made out of a wire frame and then, intricate beadwork sewn in between. And he was saying how, when he grew up with that, he was always dismissed as, this is kind of junk. It's souvenir stuff. It's really not. That was the opinion that most people had. And he always thought it was very beautiful, and it's not easy to do, and they're works of art. So he wanted to elevate that to another level and literally show how beadwork can knock your socks off. So beginning small with these replicas of AK-47s, I mean, full scale, so it looks like the gun, but it's all done out of African beadwork, wireframe and beads. And they took those back out into the countryside, let people hold them, make them, whatever. And they found that it was a very sort of healing experience. These sort of AK-47 shaped things that used to be pointed at them. Now it's something that represents their culture, and they could take some sort of ownership of it in a good way. And from there, they took it a little further and got a what's called a Caspier. It's an armored troop carrier that was designed and built in South Africa, and it was also used. So it's a big, like 4-ton vehicle that could hold a dozen people or so inside, and it was mainly, a police type vehicle to enforce apartheid. And so they took one of those, and that was the first big work. They beaded it. So it is covered literally inside and out of thousands, millions probably, of these tiny glass beads in the African style. And then finally, third part of this trilogy, and I hope I'm not getting a little too long-winded about this, but it's quite a project. So about 5.5, 6 years ago is when they started beating the MiG. And it has, they haven't done a real count yet. They're safe saying, at least 20 million glass beads are covering this. And here I have a sample. I just happen to have a little sample here. I'm not sure if I could hold it up close enough to, but this is what the beadwork looks like up close. So it's wireframe and then these little tiny, barely 1/8 of an inch size glass beads.
That would have
so
taken forever.
Imagine enough that's going to cover a jet that's 50 feet long with a 24-foot wingspan, plus the fuel tanks and missiles and the cockpit. And it's really something, so they completely transformed it. It's really striking.
Is that the first thing when people come into the museum they go look at?
No, I wish that, we could have put it right up front, but there's no room, the way the museum is set up. You can't walk in and there it is. So the exhibition itself is kind of done in 2 parts throughout the museum. So we have our temporary exhibition space that's in the old Boeing Red Barn factory. So we use that as for temporary exhibits. So we have 3 galleries there that begin this story. So in those galleries, you learn about parts 1 and parts 2 of the beading project, or what's called the Weapons of Mass Production trilogy. And so it has examples of those AK-47s, large-scale photographs of the projects back in those times. And then also, now imagine...
we need to take a break. This break's about 4.5 minutes long. And we come back, let's finish that, and then let's talk about that old barn, the first plant of Boeing's. It was originally in Seattle, down, I think, before the bridge down there. So we'll talk about that with Ted. We'll be right back right after this.
This is NDTR Breaking News. This is Guy Ticker in the Night Dreams Talk Radio Network newsroom with a breaking story. Here it is. This just in. 13 states sue Burger King. over inflated whopper ads. You heard that correctly. A class action lawsuit claims BK's ads show whoppers way bigger than they actually are. This reporter believes the board of directors is made up exclusively of high school seniors. Come on, Burger King, there's no shame in it. The story goes on to ask, how many guys have claimed their Whopper was bigger than it really is? This reporter is just saying that when the bun looks like a mattress and the patty looks like a manhole cover, expectations get flame grilled. Tune in to Night Dreams Talk Radio this week as we bite into the... Who wrote this? As we bite into the legal beef with a side of laughs and some sizzling truth. I'm Guy Ticker in the Night Dreams Talk Radio Network newsroom. We now return you to your regularly scheduled program.
This has been breaking news on the Night Dreams Talk Radio Network. Stay tuned to your local station for further updates.
Night Dreams Talk Radio, the show they warned you about, and for damn good reason.
And we are back with Ted from the Museum of Flight. Okay, let's finish what we were talking about before the break, and then I want to talk about that red, building that, was the first factory for Boeing aircraft.
Yeah. So as I was saying, the MiG-21 project is it's divided into two areas because we didn't have room inside our normal galleries to fit the airplane. So first part of the exhibit is in the Red Barn, and then the airplane itself is in our giant aviation pavilion because we do have room out there. So it is something that you see like when you first walk in the pavilion and you're kind of looking straight down. Here's all these big airplanes, and then you notice something kind of glowing, at the end of this thing 100 feet away. And as you get closer, there it is.
Interesting. And how have people taken to it? I mean, is it a major attraction there?
The response has been very positive from just about everyone. Even the people that thought, what's it doing here? Why an art project? You're an aviation and space museum, but I think overall, people are kind of overwhelmed by what they see because it is beautiful. And that was part of the simple intention was they want something that is beautiful and striking, literally like one of the project manager was saying, okay, we want to make something that'll knock your socks off. So I want to see a pile of socks next to that airplane. And figuratively, I think that's happening because people are awestruck by it. So the response has been very good, very positive. There's a few people that might grumble, like, well, you know, that used to be a flying airplane. Now look what you've done to it. It's like, well, on the other hand, it was destined for the scrap heap. So in a way, it was rescued. If you're looking out for the welfare of a former aircraft, then, it's been taken care of and given a new life in a totally different way. And I'm sure it'll be around for a long, long time. It's something that'll probably end up in a major art museum, I would think.
Well, a lot of people don't realize, if you go out and get one that's been, rebuilt and got the certification, then there's some companies that do that and sell them. But if you just went out and bought a MiG or you bought a plane, I had a friend that bought a Harrier, and it took him about 2 years to get certification to fly it. People don't realize that. It's not like going out to your aircraft dealer and buying a plane.
Oh, yeah. I remember when, after the breakup of the Soviet Union, there were a lot of planes like this hitting the market. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, literally, like I said, there was the most mass-produced supersonic jet, and about 12,000 of them were made.
But wait a minute. Wait a minute. North Korea, that's what they fly, a lot of them yet.
Yeah, there still are a few flying. I'm not sure exactly I wouldn't be surprised if there are some in North Korea, but I'm not sure. But I know Pakistan still has some. Indian Air Force still has a few that are operational, but definitely not a frontline fighter anymore. But the performance of them was really spectacular. I mean, you look at, things like its ability to climb, its speed to climb back in the 1950s and early 60s was really equal to or greater than an F-16, which came along a lot later. So it was really a classic airplane. When you just want to talk about airplanes, it was one of the best. It had its drawbacks. As far as a fighter goes, it had short range and that sort of thing. That was always a problem. Because it was mainly made to be small, lightweight, easy to maintain. That's kind of the philosophy of those MiGs back then, or, especially the Soviet fighters. They wanted something that was robust, rugged, easy to fix in the field. And it pretty much took care of all those check marks in a very good way.
Yeah, very interesting. Now, how did you guys get the old red barn? That was what it was called. My father worked in it for a while.
Really?
Yeah, down the bottom of Boeing Hill. People don't know about that. But yeah, it was down there. And I tell you, it was very interesting. But how did you guys end up with it?
Well, kind of lucked out in a way, because it was sitting on its original spot on the Duwamish River, where Boeing started. So it was originally a shipyard. So they made boats there, including Bill Boeing Sr.'s yacht. And during World War I, Boeing had already taken an interest in aviation. He'd become a pilot and, figured out, okay, I think I can make airplanes. Let's do this. And, the shipyard wasn't doing very well at that time. It's World War I. Nobody's buying yachts anymore or making them. So Boeing pretty much bought the shipyard for a song, and but said, okay, well, now we're going to start making airplanes. Same big craft, made out of wood. And they were float planes. His first contracts were for float planes for the Navy. So you're on the water, even though they didn't fly and test them there on the river. So what they did, they would make them there, and then box the plane up, take it across town, and they had another little facility and sort of like a boat launching ramp on Lake Union in Seattle. And that's where they would actually fly and test the airplanes. But the Red Barn was used from, like I say, from the very beginning in 1916. The first planes rolled out of there. Really up through the 1950s, they were still using it. And then it, like a lot of old corporate buildings, it just started falling into disrepair. It wasn't used much anymore. And Boeing was about ready to demolish the thing because it was going to fall apart anyway. And that's where Bill Boeing Jr. comes into the picture because, he was a big supporter of what was called at that time the Pacific Northwest Aviation Historical Society. And that's what the Museum of Flight was before it became the Museum of Flight. And that started in the mid-1960s, a very small space near Seattle Center. And they came up with the idea of, okay, Bill Boeing Jr. did not want to see this building demolished. He understood the history of it and the importance of it. And at the same time, they'd been talking to the folks at King County and King County Airport. And they made a deal with the county to more or less get this $1 a year lease that's renewed about every 100 years. On the idea was, let's move this factory to the airport location. So that's what they did in the late 1970s. They barged it from its original location, floated it upstream about 2 miles, because it used to be at the end of Boeing Field. So the planes would roll out of there, and now they're pretty much at the northern end of Boeing Field and the runways. And now the Red Barn is located pretty much at the other end of the runways and close to them. So that was moved here, and the building was restored, and that's when it was the organization was renamed as the Museum of Flight, and the Red Barn became the new museum. So the museum, as people know it now, began in the Red Barn, and it just got bigger and bigger after that.
Well, it's a beautiful museum, I can tell you that. How many planes are in there?
Well, there's about 150 aircraft and spacecraft spread out over 5 buildings, 23 acres.
Wow. You even got some passenger jets there, too, and a B-52 bomber.
Yeah, that one is, that's another story, because it used to be when it was, we'll say, given, because planes like that, most of the post-World War II aircraft, the military aircraft from the Navy and the Air Force, they still belong to those organizations. It still belongs to the Air Force, or the plane would still belong to the Navy, and they would loan them out. So it's more or less a permanent loan, so long as you take care of it. So when that plane was decommissioned, it was delivered to Payne Field up in Everett. And it sat there in the middle of the field by the edge of the runways for 30 plus years, I believe. And because it's a B-52, and we still use B-52s for bombing, that plane was, any movements that were made by that plane had to be reported, duly reported, because of the SALT treaties. It's still a bomber. And, our agreements with the Soviet Union was that, we have to report movements like that, or the existence of it. So it was in clear view and always had to be reported on. But finally, that part went away, and we were able to move it down here to our museum location, and that wasn't that long ago, really. That was, I think about 2015 or so, 2016, maybe a little later than that.
Did
I
they
get it
have
mixed up anymore.
Did they have to disassemble it to transport it?
Oh, yeah. First, it was more or less restored on the outside, So we cleaned it up. It was completely repainted and restored on the exterior, and that's when it was sitting up there in one piece. Then to transport it, we had to take it apart, and it's a lot of big pieces, and yes. But like most airplanes, that's the way you can do it. You can take airplanes apart and put
But
it
I
back
got to
together
ask you a
again.
question, Ted. When they took it apart and put it back together, did they have a big box of bolts left over, like when I work on a car?
Probably. I wouldn't be surprised.
Okay.
But yeah. So the biggest part, though, was this, the fuselage, which is, about 90 feet long. That had to be put on a special flatbed that is used for transporting things like that. And that was quite a mission. We did that in the middle of the night because it had to be driven down I-5, so had to go through the middle of the night, the least traffic possible, because you got this huge flatbed truck and trailer going down the road. It looked like a locomotive on the freeway. It was really something.
Very interesting. Now, also, you got like a biplane that looks like a racer or something hanging from the ceiling in there?
Maybe you're talking about the GB?
Yeah, that's it.
It's a monoplane.
Okay.
But it was same era, so we're talking about 1932, 33, something like that. And, the air race planes were still kind of a mixture of biplanes and monoplanes, but most of them by that time were transitioning to monoplanes. And the GBs, I think they've really found their place in popular culture, back then and to the present, because they look like nothing else. And the idea was that let's take the biggest engine that we can use. And at that time, they're the most powerful were these big radial engines. So it's a round engine. So it's a huge round engine. And let's build a fuselage, an airplane around that. So what you end up with is something that's got this barrel of a fuselage that barely tapers at the end with a little tiny tail and short rounded wings down below, and it looks like nothing else. But there's something just fascinating about its looks that really endures. There's so many pilots that grow up fantasizing about the GBs, and part of that is their history of back then. They had this reputation as a pilot killer because there were some incredible disasters with them. They were a fast plane. They won air races. And the one that we have is a replica of one of those, the original version of that, the City of Granville, as it was called, named anyway. That was lost in an air race back, I think, in 32. But this was a replica that was made in Southern California, and it was acquired by the Disney company to be and used in the movie The Rocketeer.
Oh, wow.
So if you've seen The Rocketeer, which I recommend because it's a fun movie, from about 1990s, early 90s or 1990s, something like that. Fun movie. It all takes place back in the 1930s, and the main character is an air race pilot. So they've got that plane. They've got another vintage race plane in it as well. And then, of course, Nazis are the villains, and there's this jetpack. And anyway,
wow,
it's a movie star airplane. And it banged around a little bit with Disney, and then Disney sold it to another museum, and then we got it from that museum, and now it's ours.
Was it flyable at that point?
As far as I know, but there's another story associated with it. It wasn't a fun plane to fly, because it was a replica. The builder probably made a few changes from the original, maybe not the best changes. So there were two pilots that flew these aircraft in the movie. And the story goes that, okay, they're all done. They've got all the scenes shot. The stunts are done. Dangerous flying is all done. And they're on location only about 60 miles away from its home airport. And one of them looks at the other and says, "Do you want to fly it back?" "No." The other one says, "Do you want to fly it back?" "No." So it was trucked back to its home airport. And I don't know if anybody flew it after that. It was just, they considered themselves lucky that they didn't crash during the making of the movie. Their contract was fulfilled and they were done.
Oh, wow. Yeah, again, was it they were scared about flying it, they could crash on them?
It's just a difficult plane, takeoffs and landings more than anything else. It's virtually zero visibility from the cockpit when you're close to the ground and very touchy. But they weren't all like that. There was another one made by a pilot called Delmar Benjamin. And, there goes a 777X just landing. The fun. There's my office location, office with a view.
Well, what's wrong with that?
I love it. So anyway, this guy, Benjamin, he was like a lot of people, like me, who was just fascinated by the GBs and knew about their reputation. And he became, he was a crop duster pilot and a stunt, air show pilot. So, he was really good. And he decided, I'm going to find out for myself what it's like to fly these things. So he built one that was an accurate copy of the largest, air GB. And he thought that it was an amazingly good airplane. And the only change that they made to it is that he realized, okay, the way the controls are set up for landing that plane were very unusual. It was sort of like most planes, okay, you control the brakes with your feet. And so it gives you a kind of a natural way as controlling the rudder and elevator and the brakes at the same time when you land. The original GB had a different sort of thing, that they figured that, okay, you pull the stick back on landing and now you're using the brakes as well. And, the way Benjamin describes it is sort of like, okay, maybe they thought of it's like slowing down a horse and pulling back the rein, like, whoa, boy. But what he found out is that you're going too slow at that point for the plane to be very controllable on the ground, because the rudder was so tiny. So that's where he thought that this is not a good idea. So the only change they made to the plane is that they disconnected that arrangement and gave it regular sort of toe brakes that we'd have on the rudder pedals. That way he could come in a little faster and make a wheel landing, as it's called. So he could keep the speed up until he's fully in control, and now he was lowering the tail. And you can make a normal sort of landing that you would of any tail wheel airplane. But he flew that in air shows all over the country. I saw it a couple times, and it was just a wonderful thing to see. But he loved that plane, and it kind of dispelled all those myths about it being an uncontrollable, bad flying airplane. He said, no, it's very stable. It was a great cross-country airplane. And then he would put on these wonderful air shows. It's not like a aerobatic plane that's got great maneuverability, but he could do enough of demonstration flights with it that it was just fun to watch, because it's like this big loud bumblebee going by.
Now, what is the most rarest plane you have in the museum?
That would have to be the World War I era Caproni CA-20. And it's regarded as the very first fighter aircraft. It dates back to the very early days of World War I. So things are just starting up. And, airplanes, they're still trying to find their way up. What are they going to do with airplanes in this scenario? And Caproni, so this is Italy, so it's, think of Capronis as sort of like the Boeing of Italy. It was already making airplanes, and they make airplanes now. It's a well-established aircraft kind of firm, dynasty in a way, family thing. And they designed this plane that was a monoplane, so one wing, and they put a machine gun. They put some struts up above the wing and mounted a machine gun. And they said, well, here's a plane you can fire it. They had this mechanism leading down from the gun and into the cockpit, so you could fire the gun from inside the cockpit. And they said that this could be an offensive weapon. And basically the generals are going like, we don't see a need for something like that. We want big planes. We want bombers and observation planes. So they didn't get the contract for that. And Caproni went on to make some of the biggest planes in World War I. So they became famous at that period mostly for their big airplanes that fulfilled that contract. But the Caproni family, kept the airplane. And it remained on the family estate for about, 80 years, close to 80 years. And they somehow got to be friends with our curator at the time, back in the late 80s, I believe, mid to late 80s. And, long story short, they also decided, we've had this long enough. It's time for, our little treasure to be shared with the rest of the world. And we think you'd be a good place for it. So it was brought to the U.S. and established in our museum. And what sets it apart also is that it was never restored, like most of the planes here. So what you're seeing is over 100 years old. It's original fabric, and it is peeling off in some spots, and it looks pretty fragile. But that's also part of its appeal. You're seeing something that really dates back to the earliest days, some of the earliest days of aviation, and it's a one-of-a-kind airplane. And you look at an F-35 and you can say, well, its ancestor is that plane, really.
Isn't it strange when you think about technology, how far we advanced in craft in the short span? It's really mind-boggling.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's when you look at the future, I think it's fascinating that we're kind of on the cusp of a new era in aviation in a couple different ways. One of them is, the remotely piloted or autonomous flying machines of all kinds of sizes and shapes and speed characteristics. And then also for a lot of planes, it's the electrification, the power that airplanes are starting to fly with now and will eventually go that way. There have been some setbacks more recently in that direction, but I think sort of like a lot of things, it's going that direction, and people will eventually say, wow, you guys used to fly in these big planes with these loud, noisy, smelly, gas-using engines.
Another thing that's interesting, how come you don't have a Concorde there?
We do.
You do? Oh my! Well, whatever. Well, tell people about that.
Yeah. Oh, Concorde. Yeah, that's one of my favorites, and it's one of everyone's favorites, really. It's people come here to see the Concorde. It's a former British Airways plane, and it was the last commercial passenger flight for Concorde. And its last flight was from New York to Seattle, mostly over Canada, because they plotted a course over northern Canada so they could go supersonic over the land, make it transcontinental, because they couldn't fly over the U.S. at supersonic speeds. So it was delivered here in, I think, November of 2003. And it's gorgeous. You know, those planes are really something. There's only 14 of them were in service. You know, there are only, I think 20 made. So including the prototypes, and then there were a few others that were pretty much just spares.
You know, too bad Boeing's never went through with the SST. My father was working on the electronics on it, designing some of it. And, you know, he was really disenchanted when they killed the program.
Yeah, that's an interesting part of aviation history, because, you know, in the 1960s, you know, we think, okay, we're going to the moon, technology is going towards the future in all sorts of ways. And as far as aviation goes, most people, or a lot of people, were thinking, well, that means that airliners are going to be supersonic. You know, they've gone about as fast as they could go by that time in conventional methods, and let's go supersonic. And by the end of the 1960s, well, there were some problems with that, especially with large airplanes, and if you wanted to make a commercial venture of it, because now you've got something that is facing a few hurdles. One of them being that, you know, environmentally, there was an environmental awareness in 1970 and the early 70s that didn't exist really, you know, a decade before that, when the supersonic sort of push was beginning. And they thought that, you know, these planes that were cruising, they would have to cruise at, twice the height of most airliners. So they cruise at 50,000 feet or so, or above 50,000 feet. And, you know, they figured that could harm the ozone layer.
Yeah.
If there were lots of those flights. So there was that. And then also, hey, it's making a sonic boom. So there's this shock wave that follows it wherever it goes. And that was not a pleasant scenario for a lot of people everywhere. And there's not much that you could do about that. It's just going to happen. And that's been a problem with the supersonic planes ever since.
Well, there's
NASA,
There's a company out there, I think in California, is designing, and they're trying to build a supersonic, you know, again, airliner.
Yeah, Boom Supersonic, kind of an odd choice for a name, for if you want to portray it as quieter than most supersonic airplanes. But yeah, they've been around for a while now with a few different designs. Their design is pretty much set now. They have a prototype that is doing testing, and that it's flown supersonic, but we're talking about something that's really about the size of a jet trainer, you know. So it's more like looking at a T-33 type aircraft, you know, so a small jet that is testing out sort of basic wind shapes and the aerodynamics of what they propose for something much bigger. But they're still up against some of the same hurdles. The other thing that I wanted to mention about Concorde is that, you know, it was a gas guzzler. And because of that, it didn't have the range that would make it really practical for a fast airplane. So if you could fly at, Mach 2 over the Pacific, and cut those long routes, to Asia and Australia, you would have a real money-making proposition. But it didn't have that range. I mean, it'd barely make it across the Atlantic. So you did have the London to New York flights. Those are possible. But there were times when, hey, they had to land short. They had to refuel and maybe gander or something like that. So once the airlines realized this, there were dozens of airlines that had signed up for the Concorde when it was in its early stages. But by the time it was ready to fly in service, all that was left were really the original state airlines of Air France and British Airways. Everyone else had bowed out because it just did not look like a practical proposition. And you're saying that, okay, you still have to make, if you want to fly around the world in something like that at these long distances, you're going to have to stop a few times versus a 747, which was coming into service, that could fly it nonstop. So it's a slower airplane, but there's no stops. And when you start adding things all up, you've got something that doesn't take that much longer, and it's going to be a lot cheaper.
Oh, yeah, but I tell you, when it flew over Seattle, when it came, people were gawking. It made the news big time. It was just a beautiful craft to see it.
Oh, it's just gorgeous. It's really one of the most pretty planes I think ever designed, because there's hardly a straight line on it. Everything's just got a little bit of a curve to it. It seems to have some of that aesthetic that goes back to kind of the analog world, and since then, okay, you can make things fly a little better now because we've got the tools to design them are so refined. And a lot of times that just takes away from the aesthetic, because if you're going to go with the better part, okay, it needs an angle here and an angle there, and you're kind of losing that kind of draft board touch.
Yeah, but you know what? Crashes of airplanes, commercial jets and stuff are way down compared to what it was 10, 15, 20 years ago. So I can see, that technology is advanced so far that they can design this stuff. So yeah, you hear about a plane crashing here and there, but, go back 10, 15 years ago, and there was a lot of plane crashes worldwide.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's mind-boggling how safe it is. When I look at something like a modern airliner, and you think of everything that goes into it, people talk about, rocket science. Well, rocket science in some ways seems kind of simple in comparison, because it's basically this one engine that has to do something, and it goes in one direction, and you don't have to worry too much about creature comforts or anything else like that. So you can be very specific with your design to make sure that everything goes right. But airliners, not only are there miles of wires inside and environmental controls to keep everybody comfortable, hundreds of people comfortable, and avionics systems, and then linking that with the systems on the ground all over the world for a system that works seamlessly. It's really astonishing. When the deeper you get into it, the more unbelievable it seems to me. There's so much that goes into it that works so well.
Yeah, my wife, years ago, when she worked for Boeing, she was a technical designer for the 777, and she was up on the planes quite a bit while they were doing testing. And I tell you, she loved it. Now, you wrote a book. Why don't you tell the listeners about your book?
Well, I've got a couple of them now, but I think you mentioned the Edwards book.
Yeah.
intro. And yeah, it's a photo history of Edwards Air Force Base from its beginnings back in the 1930s up until the space shuttle era. And a little background on Edwards is that it's known as, it's the Air Force's main flight test center. So if the Air Force needs a new airplane, it is tested. It's put through the ringer at Edwards, and that's what the whole facility is designed for. So it has huge, hundreds of square mile controlled airspace that goes from pretty much to the ground up to space, and all the equipment that is needed to monitor flights in that airspace. And that's where the test pilots are. The Air Force Test Pilot School is there. A lot of civilian contractors are there as well. So all the major airplane manufacturers at one time or another have worked there or are still there to test their own airplanes or to test the planes that they designed for, the Air Force or the Navy or whomever, and for NASA as well. So since the 1940s, it has been NASA Aeronautics main flight test center as well. So all those incredible X-planes of the 1940s, beginning with the X-1 that Chuck Yeager used to first break the sound barrier. So all those incredible designs from the 50s and 60s, with all kinds of different wings and rocket planes, and X-15 that was a space plane in the 1950s and 1960s. It's still just an incredible thing. So the book is it's an easy read because it's made to be mostly photos with some fairly detailed captions of the aircraft and the people that developed these things at Edwards. We didn't mention that's in Southern California. It's about 110 miles in the Mojave Desert north of Los Angeles.
How can people find it?
Oh, the usual ways. It's on Amazon. It's on any place online that sells books generally, and especially aviation or space books. So it's easy to find. Just look up Edwards Air Force Base with my name, and they can find that. And then, more recently, last fall, I've put out a book. We're back to Edwards again, but it's a different subject. During the 1980s, I went out there to watch space shuttle landings. And
I bet you took a lot of pictures, didn't you?
Well, exactly, because I was a photographer. So I always had my camera with me. And the first time I went there, I realized this is really an amazing scene here. So the main feature at Edwards that made it stand apart from every other place in the world for doing this type of flying is that it has this ancient dry lake bed. Now, a dry lake is not a concept that you hear of in the Northwest, but imagine something about the 4 or 5 times larger than Elliott Bay, so 44 square miles, a lake. But it's only a lake in the wintertime. So it's completely flat out there. And when you get rains in the wintertime, typically, there's a few inches of rain. So it forms what looks like a lake. And it's only a few inches deep. And what happens is that while the water's on that pretty much flat clay surface, it moves around. The winds blow it, from here to there. When I used to work out there, it almost seemed like magic, or my mind was playing tricks with me, because one day I would be driving up to the base and I look out over towards the lake bed, and it's like, wait a second, the lake was over here yesterday. Now it's over here. it would shift. And as it shifted, it smoothed out that surface below. And then as the weather warms up, which didn't take too long, it all evaporates. And what you end up with is this hard, flat surface. As I mentioned, I'll say 44 square miles of it. So for the Air Force, for flying out there, all they have to do for runways is that they would paint the lines. Here's a runway. Here's a runway. So there's about 14 different runways out there of different sizes and directions. So you could land it in virtually any direction, which is a big help when you're flying experimental airplanes and all of a sudden everything's going wrong and you need to land like right now. You don't want to have to be restricted to one runway in a certain direction. That could be the wrong thing. Or if it's too short, they're flying planes that might have to land at hundreds of miles an hour. They're going to need miles just to slow down. So Edwards, that location, it was chosen because of the unique geographical attributes to it. And that's also why the space shuttle was first flown there, because they could land it on the lake bed runways, which were, we'll say, infinitely long. But, the longest is 7 miles. So that's, 3 times longer than what you're going to find out at your normal international airport. So shuttle program, all the early shuttle flights were out at Edwards. And I was living in LA at the time. And being a fan, I just had to go out there and start and watch these shuttle landings. So I started taking photos, and there was quite a gathering out there. The Air Force would open up a little section of the lake bed about 3 miles from the runway. So this section of the dry lake bed, they open up the road there. They put this little flimsy wooden fence that extended a few miles into the lake bed and around, so you couldn't encroach too far. And then they painted more lines on it that everyone could park on. And those first landings would attract hundreds of thousands of people.
Wow.
All parked along these neat straight lines that would go on for miles. And they would open it up for that a day before a shuttle landing, and then land and go home. So within that 24 hours, a community would spring up. And it was really, really amazing. It was something with, it was as if a small town, old-fashioned small town would spring up. Because once you got there, you park, and there's no place to go. You want to keep your camping spot, your parking spot. So there's no driving. And if you arrive there in the afternoon, okay, well, I got all afternoon, all evening, what to do? So the pace there was really slow. People would stroll, they'd hang out by their campsite, they'd meet other people. So it was kind of an old-timey atmosphere to watch this thing that is the cutting edge of spaceflight technology. So the photos, I went there for 8 different landings, and I took photographs at each one. And this latest book called Waiting for Spaceships, Scenes from a Desert Community in Love with the Space Shuttle, is sort of a composite 24 hours of waiting on the lake bed from the arrival time until the shuttle finally lands.
Very interesting. And again, they can find that everywhere? Like Amazon?
Yes, same. Amazon, same sort of thing. Or here's another thing you can do. If the Museum of Flight store sells it, and if you call in an order, if you want it signed, you want it personalized, just tell them, hey, have Ted sign it for me before you ship it. So we can do that as well. They can order the book. Bookstore will tell me that this one needs a little personalization, and I'll do that, and they'll ship it off as normal.
Very interesting. Now, a question out there. One of our listeners, or viewers, So
good.
why don't people talk about the SR91 Aurora?
Good question. Because I wonder about myself. I wondered about that myself. It was kind of a hot topic, maybe 15 years ago or so, maybe even longer. And then it kind of faded away. So I don't personally know what happened to that program. It was never really admitted as a real program, but all sorts of rumors. And, it's given the history of, so many planes like the Blackbird and the F-117, they had a secret period. And it's hard to believe there's not something out there that is flying around that we don't know about yet.
Now, wasn't NASA one of the last flying the SR-71?
Right. It was, I was there at that time. So it was 1999, and it was the Edwards Air Force Base Air Show, and which was in October. So they always try to make it around the anniversary of the first supersonic flight. So October 14th. And anyway, they would do some demo flights with the Blackbird, which were fantastic. I still think myself awfully lucky that I was around to see Blackbirds fly. It's a sound and a sight like nothing else. But they flew on that Saturday, and they had some sort of a mechanical problem. I forget exactly what it was. Didn't stop the flight or anything like that. But once they hangared it, they realized something needs to be fixed. We don't want to fly it. And so they didn't fly it on Sunday. And as time went on, they just realized, we don't have a new research program for it. It kind of ended by default. They decided it's kind of over. It's not worth fixing because we don't have a use for it right now.
Yeah, that's interesting too. Now you have a couple helicopters there, don't you?
Oh yeah. Well, let's see. We've got a HH-52 that used to be, that's one of those amphibious helicopters that used to be very common with the Coast Guard. Ours was based at Port Townsend for a long, long time, and that's where it was flying until we got it. So it's one of those big boxy looking things with kind of pontoon landing gear, and the stories that I've heard with those just are astounding. With so we've got that. We've got a Piasecki, the banana-shaped helicopter from the 1960s. That's at our restoration center. So it's still being restored. It'll be gorgeous when it's done because it's done in bare aluminum finish. So it'll really shine. It's starting to look that way already, but it's still got a long ways to go.
And you have a Huey there too.
And a Huey, of course.
I was on a lot of those in Vietnam.
Really?
Lot of them.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, and ours has a Vietnam history to it. So it was a combat airplane. It does have a history, and it's restored back to its colors that it flew at that time and the squadron and everything. So, and we've had some visitors. One of the things that's really satisfying, and humbling here at the museum is that a lot of people come here because they have a personal history with some of the aircraft, and especially the military aircraft. And, we've had people that used to fly this plane or that plane. And, I've met a few that flew the Huey, and others that were maybe rescued by that aircraft. When we first installed it, we had sort of a reunion of Rangers that used to be associated with that plane. And man, hardly a dry eye in the house once the stories started flowing.
Oh, yeah. How do people find the museum? They're up in the Seattle area.
We're easy to find because we're just off of I-5 south of downtown Seattle. So there's the freeway exits, easy to find from north or south on I-5. And tons of free parking, which as time goes on becomes more and more of an asset compared to most other places in Seattle where your parking situation becomes a nightmare. So we still have big parking lots and lots of space. So
And it's easy to find.
Easy
too.
to drive here. And there's buses that come directly from downtown, public transit as well.
And you can't miss it because it's next to all these Boeing buildings, which one of them used to be corporate for Boeing back years ago.
Yeah, we're at the south end of the runways, southwest side of the runways at Boeing Field, surrounded by lots of airplane activity. Like I said, I just saw this new 777 land, and just south of my office here is the Boeing military lot. So let's see, what do we got here? Yeah, it's got about 3 or 4 KC-46s over there. So there's always something going on here. Which I like. It's the museum experience is not just retired airplanes, but Boeing Field is very active in a very unusual way. Everything from general aviation to military planes.
It sure is. I'll tell you, it's one of the busier airports.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, hey, I really enjoyed having you on. Is there anything you want to say here? You got 2 minutes?
Oh, no, well, it's been a pleasure. Time has flown by. It's been great.
Well, I enjoyed having you on. Everybody needs to go down to the Museum of Flight if you're into aircraft, and if you're not, even it's just you go there and you realize how technology has changed over the years. And they even have a spacesuit and from NASA. They got do you have any capsules down there?
Oh yeah, we didn't even get into space. That's a whole different thing.
Oh yeah.
And that collection is getting larger and more current. So we do have one exhibit that is looking at the early space race up to the moon. So we've got like a complete F1 engine that used to be on a Saturn V booster, the moon rocket. So, and a couple remains from ones that actually flew on Apollo 12, Apollo 16. So you can't see those anywhere else in the world. We have the first production Apollo space capsule and what used to be called the NASA full fuselage trainer. So it's a full-scale replica of the space shuttle without the wings that NASA had in Houston to train the astronauts.
Wow. So a lot of stuff to go and look at. Plus you got a store where people can buy books and buy all kinds of cool things. Well, Ted, I want to thank you so much for taking the time after the hours to come on the show. But I tell you what, a lot of people are into old aircraft and modern aircraft, and that's why I had you come on.
Well, thanks, Gary. Really appreciate it. And it's always a pleasure talking to you.
Okay, my friend. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
Well, JC, we're in debate if we're going to be doing a show or not. I was not feeling very good today. Found out I had COVID again. I can't believe that.
Yeah, I hope you feel better. Well, only time will tell going forward, so we'll know more tomorrow about this.
Yeah, 4 times I've had COVID. 4 times.
I know. Oh, big thank you to Rory. Just gave $10 and said, great show tonight. So thank you, Rory.
Well, thank you, Rory. You got to get on here more often and even call in, too. Well, everybody, maybe we'll be on tomorrow. Again, I can't say, depending on how I feel. But if we are on tomorrow, who would we have?
We'll have Mr. Dr. Gregory Rogers, 30-year career in NASA, flight surgeon. He's got some fascinating stories, and he has seen some amazing things.
Didn't he see a UFO?
He sure did, and it had...
Go ahead and say it.
United States Air Force insignia on it. So how about that?
Yeah. And he trained who? Some of the famous astronauts.
Well, he's friends with Buzz and a few other astronauts. He's intermingles with them, of course, because was with NASA. So, yeah, it's going to be a really good show.
Well,
so
you
don't
know
wanna miss
what,
out.
too? You forgot to tell the people. You know, he flew dozens and dozens and dozens of military aircraft.
He flew pretty much all of them because he had to fly what every pilot flew so he could analyze if they were physically or mentally able to fly that specific aircraft design that they flew. So, yeah.
Yeah, wouldn't that be interesting? Hey, you're going to fly this one, you're going to fly that one, you're going to fly this. I tell you, I'm going to try to make it tomorrow, even if I'm on my deathbed, because, it's going to be an exciting show. I wish I would have asked Ted if he ever seen a UFO. I should have done that. Anyway, everybody out there, again, I want to thank Rory. Oh, wait a minute. I still have him on here. Let's find out real quick. Have you seen a UFO?
Me?
Yeah.
Well, I do have a story that goes back to something that you mentioned early on. Want to hear?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So back in my days when I was towing gliders, the glider port was located, about 20, 30 miles from Edwards Air Force Base. So, and this is at a time when the B-2 was still in its testing phase. So never seen one fly before. So I'm up cruising in my little tow plane, and I look off pretty much at my altitude, to the north, and I saw this thing that it's saucer shape. It's at my altitude. It's flying. And I had that moment of like, is this for real? Am I really seeing this? And I watched that for, long enough to really question what's going on. And then all of a sudden it turns. And now it goes from something that's, tadpole saucer shape to B-2 wings. So it's this big black V, with jagged edges, and there is no mistaking that's what it was. But, from its profile, it doesn't have a conventional tail like airplanes, it doesn't have a conventional fuselage. So it just looked like this strange thing flying in the sky.
Did you get scared when you saw it?
I got excited. I wasn't scared, but
I'm going to tell you a real quick story. I had a friend years ago who was a vice president of Republic Airlines. I've said this story so many times, but during Vietnam, he was a colonel, and he used to fly, I believe, out of Guam over to North Vietnam, and what he said would drop his, eggs. On the way back, his co-pilot said, look off the wing. And he looked off the wing, and he claims it was a UFO, a round disc, following him. And then it went poof real fast. He got on the horn and radioed it in. His co-pilot said, don't do it, don't do it. Now, he wanted to retire as a brigadier general. And that was his goal. That's what he told me. He was told when he landed not to depart, none of the crew to depart, till they were escorted from the plane. When he landed, they surrounded with military jeeps, with guards with M16s pointing at the aircraft, and then they took each person, loaded them on a separate jeep, and took them into this building and separated the whole crew. And what he said is about an hour or two later, two guys in suits came in and said, well, you didn't see it. And he goes, oh, I saw it. He goes, well, did you didn't see it. And they said, well, we hear you want to stay in and make brigadier general. You're not going to make any rank now. And they suggested that he, resign his commission. And that's what he did. And then what he also told me too, that he used to advise the pilots at Republic Airlines, if you ever see a UFO, you don't talk about it, you don't radio it in, because if you do, you won't be flying anymore. That's, now it's changed a lot. But I remember a pilot back about 10 years ago, it was grounded because he radioed in, he saw a UFO. That's weird yet.
Yeah. I'm glad it's getting transparent now, or a little more open.
Yeah.
Because even though, they can explain, like 99% of what these phenomena are, but that still leaves this tiny percentage that, well, we can't figure it out yet.
Well,
So,
I will always,
I
like
love
I
that.
always say, we're not the only people in the campground.
Yeah.
And if you look at
No.
how many millions of planets out there in our galaxy that could have life more advanced than what we are. So I always think, I do believe we're being visited. And they go to Kentucky Fried Chicken too. Anyway, Ted, you
Look out below.
you have a good one, okay?
Thanks, you too.
Okay, everybody, I hope you enjoyed the show. Again, we're going to try beyond tomorrow. And everybody have a good evening. And again, a big thank you from Ted from the Museum of Flight in Seattle. If you're in Seattle, make it a point of visiting the place. Okay, we'll catch you on the other side.
Who's friends with all the night dreamers talking to you at night? Gary on the radio, but maybe he's not in sight. Bigfoot's on his tail, flying UFOs, that's right. Gary's talk show radio, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday nights. If you need a friend to talk to, here